Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This week is our C Summer Series, Week 3, The Money. We are going to be diving further into LifeWise Academy and specifically the money portion. So if you're here with us today, we really appreciate you taking the time.
It's important to note just before we get started here, LifeWise likes to refer to the financial planning and the money as loot. It's just a fun fact to give you an idea of how this is going to go. So we're going to start by looking at the overview here of total revenue and the increases over the years. You're looking at over a 300% increase in 2022, over 200% in 2023, and 250% in 2024. Their total revenue last year was over 35 million. Um, those are astronomical increases. Typically, forecasts for nonprofit revenue increases match the private sector increase forecasts. What they're predicting for expecting increase in revenue over the next 3-4 years is like a 4% increase. So when you see these kind of numbers, just know that they are so far off from what is predicted for nonprofits and what the average nonprofit increases year over year. It's just a huge amount of money. Their total assets also more than tripled in just a couple years. Got some more numbers here. You can see their total expenses are about half of what their revenue is. So if you take their total assets and their total revenue and subtract their expenses, you're looking at a net worth of 42 million. And that is of last year. It was 6 months ago. So I'm sure it has increased by the same margin over the past 6 months and will continue to for this year as well. Some of the grants, this is where they get their biggest source of funding, of course, is from private grants. Now we're talking about the corporate level here. All of this money is going to corporate LifeWise, not local programs. We'll get into how they're different here in a minute. They received 98 grants totaling $17 million since their conception. As you can see, most of them are from other organizations, a small percentage from community foundations and corporate funders. The majority is in the other category, which is going to fall under DAFs and some other things like that, which Molly will get into here. Just a minute. The average size of their grant, you can see the average, the most used grant is $10,000 to $25,000. But they do have grants that have been over $1 million. So
All right, so now we're going to talk about donor advised funds, DAFs. That is what the other is comprised of. And what this is it's an account that an individual, a family, or an organization can set up through a registered U.S. nonprofit to manage charitable giving. So what it does is it offers major tax advantages to the donors and, more importantly, provides a way to obscure the true source of donations. So if there is a recipient who's controversial in some way, that could be very beneficial. So this matters because under normal circumstances, charitable contributions in the US are publicly traceable through nonprofit tax filings. But with a DAF, like we just talked about, a billionaire can funnel money to a group that's known for targeting, like, let's say, the LGBTQ community, or pushing another extreme agenda, and their name would never appear anywhere. And so it's instead of donations, or I was going to say, instead, the donation is routed through the DAF sponsor. So it shields sort of the donor from any scrutiny. This is one of those things that's been like more popularized in maybe like the last decade or so. It's really taken off. And really what it is that the DAF is acting as a buffer, so shielding the reputation while their money shapes our culture. So if you're looking at it in sort of that way, you start to understand how this can really be beneficial for these organizations. So there's no requirement for the DAF to disperse funds on any sort of timeline. Donations can sit in these funds for years, accruing gains while they're doing so. They're growing tax-free, like I said, so they could grow tax-free while still providing the donor with the full tax benefits up front. Donations appreciate assets. So if you're donating appreciated assets, it also allows that person to avoid capital gains tax. So it creates a double tax break. So I had to break this down even for myself, I should say, because it gets a little complicated. But for example, if you bought stock for $1 million and now it's worth 5 million, if you sold it, you'd owe those capital gains, the capital gains tax on that $4 million profit. If you're donating the stock directly to a DAF instead of selling it first, you do not pay capital gains tax on that $4 million increase, and you claim the full market value as a deduction. So you will also get to deduct the full $5 million, not just the original 1 million that you paid. So the result being that you're giving to charity, but you avoid paying any taxes on the profit and get a massive tax write-off at full value. So that is something that's really important. Those little points are sort of really important to keep in mind when you're understanding how these large funds work, these DAF operators, for lack of better words. So this is taken directly from LifeWise, their website, and it lists sort of some potential charitable sponsors that you can choose from. And you'll see some probably recognizable names on this list. We're going to talk about a couple of them, but one of the biggest is the American Endowment Foundation there at the top. Then there's the National Christian Foundation, and then there's another one called Signatory down there towards the bottom. Those are the three that we're kind of going to go over a little bit further. But basically, you can send your money to this foundation, and then that foundation can give it to LifeWise, but you will never be linked to LifeWise. All right, so the American Family Endowment, they serve as a fundraising and philanthropic arm for the American Family Association. It's conservative. They're part of a conservative Christian network. They're linked to a broader network of conservative Christians that include Focus on the Family Research Council, and the Alliance Defending Freedom. Let's see here. They have nearly $7 billion in assets. Let's see what else we want to talk about. So for the fiscal year 2024, LifeWise's largest received donation of over $13 million was made by the donor advised fund, the American Endowment Foundation. And we've broken that down. So in 2023, 2022, and 2020, which totals over $14 million that they've gotten from this particular DAF. The next one we'll talk about a little further is the National Christian Foundation. They're also known as the NCF, founded in 1982 by an evangelical Christian author and entrepreneur, Larry Burkett. You might recognize his name, and a couple of other gentlemen. Basically, they have a strong emphasis on supporting Christian missionaries, religious education, and church development. They are the 8th largest nonprofit in the country and the largest Christian charity by far in the United States. They do deal with both domestic missions and international outreach. And typically they're associated with funding anti-abortion, pro-family, and faith-based educational programs, which align with the broader evangelical movement. So the NCF is also linked to other major conservative Christian organizations like the Alliance Defending Freedom, Focus on the Family, and the American Family Association. You're going to start to hear a trend with the repeating of these organizations because they are so outrageously intertwined. Recipients of the NCF's funding include places like Alliance Defending Freedom, the NRA, Texas Public Policy Foundation, Media Research Center, things like that. So you can see how much money they've given over time, 2022, 21, 20, and 2019. That's going to total over $1 million from the National Christian Foundation. So this is an interesting one. The signatory used to be called the Servant Foundation, and it was set up in Kansas by an evangelical lawyer, and it was partnered with the NCF and sort of was included in it. Their relationship was described as accounting and other backroom tasks for Servant. That's what the NCF was performing for them. In 2017, the relationship was ended, and they changed their name to the Signatory. So that would have happened in 2017. Their boom coincides with their split in 2017. It was basically during this time, they were handing out around like $1 million, maybe $4 million a year. But afterwards, they pocketed more than $1 billion in contributions, which was a large chunk of which actually came from the NCF. So they are linked to them, also known as the National Christian Foundation, and they are a little known pass-through charity. And they, like I said, they used to receive these small contributions, but they're making a big name for themselves and sort of contributing to a lot of groups that would be described as hate groups, that are classified as hate groups by the Southern Poverty Law Center. In total, Servant gave the group $65.9 million. This is specifically to ADF, so the Alliance Defending Freedom. That is the one that's sort of the largest one. They are classified as the hate group. And they gave them $65.9 million from 2018 to 21, which was like 16 million a year. And so the ADF's grant income, which basically is how much money or power they have behind them, rose from 55 million to 96.8 million. And that was the last count in like 2021. So they are huge. This is the foundation that put millions and millions of dollars into the He Gets Us ads. These were the Christian evangelical centered football ads that ran during the Super Bowl. And it's interesting that they painted Jesus as an influencer who was canceled for standing up for his beliefs. It's just a little interesting side note. They are one of ADF's biggest backers, and they have basically had a hand in changing the way that our culture is being shaped and the way that our laws are being written, and really the way that we're moving as a country. So they're definitely one to watch.
All right, so not all the grants come from DAFs. Some grants, they make disbursement decisions at an organizational level. The Stover Foundation here is a prime example of that. Not only does the organization decide, but they are by invitation only. You can only apply if the Stover Foundation reaches out to you and asks you to apply. Of course, they're Christ-centered and geared toward evangelicalism. This is the type of thing that we would expect to see. It's not surprising that an organization like this would be donating to LifeWise. It's also worth noting the 250K they contributed to Young Life, which was in the news recently for a sex scandal, I believe. Molly, you probably elaborate on that a little more than I can.
Yeah, if you're familiar, just you do a little Googling, but there was absolutely a, I believe it was like a sexual abuse scandal, even underage. I'm not sure. I think it was though. And so that is something that you don't really want to be associated with, or you wouldn't think that you'd want to be associated with. And that was like this last year. That was in 2024. So they know what's going on there, and they're still giving them money.
Yeah, so like I said, an organization like this, that's connected to these churches that LifeWise is always also connected to, and specifically geared towards evangelicalism. It doesn't surprise me to see these organizations kind of, contributing grants to them. This one did surprise me, though. The Catholic Foundation, the Foundation for the Catholic Diocese of Columbus, gave LifeWise $60,000 over 2 years. The foundation's mission is to support parishes, schools, organizations, and ministries of the Diocese of Columbus. I'm not sure how granting LifeWise money supports the needs of the Catholic community in Columbus because their beliefs don't align. They don't even align a little bit. Uh, We've got a letter here from Reverend Guerin of Huron, Ohio, in the St. Peter Catholic Church. He's boldly underlying that pastors in the community were not in favor of the program and citing major objections, saying it appears to be an abuse of the RTRI laws by giving one or two churches sole access to the school children. He goes on to say that the curriculum taught by LifeWise is not in line with the Catholic teachings and asked his congregation not to send their children or offer financial support. He closes this letter by saying local churches should educate the member children of their faith communities at the local church level. I've got another example here. This is from the Catholic parishes of Sandusky. They sent out a similar letter citing, quote, serious reservations for Catholic parents, pointing to LifeWise's statement of faith. Reverend Hoyles elaborates that LifeWise faith tenets are either not in harmony or directly contradict the Catholic faith. The Reverend details the scriptures that LifeWise uses, and he says they are, quote, deficient because they do not include the seven deuterocanonical books of the Catholic Scripture. So the Catholic Scripture has seven more books than a lot of other scriptures for different, denominations. They don't use these 7 books that the Catholic Church does use. So he's pointing that out, that LifeWise doesn't recognize this other part of the scripture that the Catholics do recognize. Uh, he also points out there's a glaring contradiction in the Catholic understanding of inherent goodness in man versus what LifeWise teaches as a character education program, that man's nature is incorrupt. So it's a big contradiction in 2 beliefs, saying that you are cut from a good cloth or you are cut from a bad cloth from the beginning, right? In closing, the Reverend again encourages parents of the parish not to send their children. And I've got one more here where it's all reiterated by Father Nathan of St. John the Baptist Catholic School and Church here in New Haven, Indiana. Um, this email was sent out to school employees and the congregation both, and he specifically mentions serious concerns with 10 of 17 points in LifeWise's statement of faith. So this doctrine is so far apart from each other, and all of these Catholic churches and dioceses are speaking out, except Columbus, who is still funding them. Even LifeWise acknowledges that their doctrine is different, and you can see that here in this training picture from a training video. They have a whole training session as part of their difficult questions, asking if Catholics are the same as Christians, where they workshop the proper way to answer this with their teachers and volunteers. Molly, you want to tell them about the other ones that are kind of funny?
Yeah. So we're going to talk about a few foundations and organizations that we don't really understand why they're giving LifeWise money, or how these organizations benefit from one another or are associated with one another. One of those being Syncora. Syncora is formerly known as Amerisource Bergen and is a global pharmaceutical solutions organization. You can see here down at the bottom where they list out that they are supporting access to healthcare for underdeserved populations around the globe, improving the health of service, companion, and production animals that support humans, and prescription drug safety. So these are the things where they're sort of having their funding areas. But in 2023, they gave LifeWise Academy over $6,000, and in 2024, they gave them over $7,000, and it was listed under education. So we're not clear on what that's about, but that is one of the grants that they received, or 2 grants that they received. This other one we also don't understand. So historically, George Edward Durrell Foundation is associated with Parkinson's, sort of like survivor support programs, scholar programs, support for the disabled. Um, some of the grantees include Hillsdale College, and yet they're giving over $2,000. Well, actually, if you want to, let's go ahead and just add them together. $7,500 in 2023 under education, and then turning around, or well, actually, and then prior to that, the year prior in 2022, giving them $15,000, and it's under musculoskeletal diseases. So we're really not sure how those two things correlate, or what the relationship is, but this is what's listed under their publicly available grant information. Same goes for Samaritan Hospital Foundation. Live healthier lives is sort of their motto. And it is, let's see, it looks like they're part of University Hospital Samaritan Medical Center, and they serve the people of Ashland County. We're not understanding this one at all. Not even beyond the fact that it's a hospital and it should be health centered, and LifeWise Academy is a religious release time program, and that disconnect. But over 20 grand in 2023 under musical theater. So there's just a lot of questionable donations coming in from a lot of organizations that have been like relisted as being Christian, or that don't make much sense, like these. And I, a lot of them I believe deserve a much closer look, and we're hoping to do that at some point.
All of these grant numbers that we've listed and showed, they are publicly available, but you have to go to the library to access them typically, or a college or somewhere like that. You can't just get them on Google. You have to either pay for a subscription or go to some sort of entity like a library or a university to access them from there. Just in case anybody wants to look them up and access it. We also have a copy of it, that we have linked at the end. So Ambassador Enterprises is a little bit different. Now we're going to talk about investing. All these other ones were donations and grants. Ambassador Enterprises has siphoned money into LifeWise, but they're an investment firm. So we're not real clear on how that works, what the return is, or maybe they did just donate straight up. We're not sure because it is an investment firm. There is no transparency in it. There is no publicly available information except what they choose to put out. And what they did choose to put out, they mentioned LifeWise 3 years in their year-end report about how they had been partnering with them and helping them build up. They did this financially, but they did it strategically as well. Before they infused a bunch of money in, they helped kind of develop the strategy and the plan and gave Joel a little bit of direction on what they needed to see before they would invest money. And that started back in 2018. And again, like I said, they were talking about and mentioning LifeWise 3 separate years. I believe it was 21, 22, and 23. But the big cash infusion or investment came in 2021. I believe they might have reinvested in 2022 from the way some of the documentation reads, but again, it's hard to tell because it's not transparent and you can't just find these numbers. I do think it's kind of funny here. We have minutes from a school board meeting, and it just so happens this could be a total coincidence or it could be something shady. I'll let you be the judge. It just so happens that the same meeting LifeWise was approved at this school board, they also accepted $1,000 donation from Ambassador Enterprises to the band, motioned by the same individual. So again, maybe it's just a coincidence, maybe not. Another big chunk of money that they took, although they love to spout that no government funds can be used and that they're privately funded, they still took money from the PPP loans. I know we've touched on this before. Um, but they took two separate loans under their parent company, Stand for Truth, which is the umbrella company. That was the name before it was LifeWise Inc. Uh, $362,000 that they took and didn't have to pay back. And they didn't have to pay back interest too, I believe, because the amount forgiven is higher than the loan amount. So the only thing I can figure there is that it's probably interest that was also forgiven. But again, this is public money. This is tax money going to them, and it's not a small amount, at least not for me. It is for them with their $35 million. And we're seeing this at a local level too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the city of Columbus, Ohio, and they voted unanimously, 9-0, to give a LifeWise $900 to sponsor a specific event. The legislation to do so, so this legislation was declared an emergency, so that the process was expedited. And we see these sorts of little things, financial microaggressions is what you'd call them, right? Or I would classify them as. And some of them are much larger than microaggressions, full on aggressions. We see this happening time and time again, like Zach said, not just at the city level, but at the state level, and on up at every level there is. We see, what amounts to our tax money, our tax funds being given to LifeWise Academy.
And not just cash either. One of the examples that we didn't actually pull up here, but that we do have that we're currently looking into is a town donating the land to LifeWise, running it through all the community meetings, doing the inspections on it, and then donating it to a secondary third party who then donates it to LifeWise. So they put that level in between them, but it's still being proposed to be given to LifeWise with the intent of, even though they're donating it to this third party, they are going to donate it to LifeWise, and all of that's getting wrote out in the agreements. But we're still looking into that. I don't believe it's finalized yet, but it's in the process of happening.
So LifeWay's gift policy, they basically list all of them out. I'm going to list all of the ones that they do without going into detail. But the following gifts may be considered for acceptance by LifeWise: monetary gifts, tangible personal property, including in-kind gifts, securities, real estate, bequests, retirement plan beneficiary designations, life insurance beneficiary designations, charitable remainder trusts, and revocable trust agreements. And so that is a lot of different hands and a lot of different pots, and a lot of options for them to be getting money from, individuals, and in multiple ways. It's definitely something to keep track of when you understand, the puzzle as a whole, as to how exactly they are raking in this money. And one of the ways is by manipulating people into doing these sort of things that you would normally leave for your family members or friends.
or to your financial advisor. I think the one that I assume some of these are probably pretty normal for a lot of organizations, but the retirement plan, that one really just kind of sticks out to me. You're just forking over your 401k payments to LifeWise. I don't understand. Um, so as Molly said, they really do manipulate and prey on individuals. Like mostly up till now, we've talked about, kind of corporate giving and these big funds doing those grants and donations, but they really prey on individuals heavily too. It's important to understand that we're talking about local LifeWise programs now. Up until this point, we've kind of been talking about LifeWise corporate, how you can just donate to them as a whole. But when we're looking at these local programs, you have to understand that they're entirely responsible for all of their own funding. Um, None of this huge money that's LifeWise is getting at the top goes back down to them. They have to come up with all of the expenses, the operating costs, the licensing fees, and all this other stuff that we'll get into at the local level. They have training and templates for all of this. They call it trust raising instead of fundraising because that's much more fun. And they want to build a relationship, not just get the money. They want to build a relationship so they can get continuous money, right? It's a very common strategy for most nonprofits and marketing schemes. They have a 7-step ask. This is all laid out. They do a kickoff campaign before a LifeWise program starts locally. This takes about 12 weeks according to their estimations. But the goal here is to get 100% of the 3-year budget before they even start. So they want to spread this as wide as they can and bring in as much money as they can before they even get started and put it all into this local program fund. They break down different campaign strategies here, and we'll kind of get into these a little bit later as well. Church presentations, annual events, different things like that. We have examples of all of these things. So this is an example budget. Uh, it is one example budget for 1 year. And it varies. It very much varies based on the size, how many kids you have, that type of thing. How many schools you're operating in, transportation, whether you have your own bus or you're walking across the street, you can cut transportation costs down to almost nothing if you're just walking kids across the street, right? So again, there's no set way to do this. Like everything in LifeWise, it varies from location to location, how much the budget is going to be. Um, like I said, they're looking for 3 years from the get-go. So they kind of lay out a 3-year budget here, and the numbers do not match the other budget we just saw. So they're all over the place, even internally. Uh, they're saying staff budget here is about half as much as it was on that last slide that we just showed. Everything on here is about half as much as it was on the last slide we just showed. So I'm not sure where the discrepancy is there. But again, when you're looking at 3 years, this is the type of money they're trying to make up front. And it just depends how many different buildings they're trying to go to in the district in the program. So some of the fees, aside from the operating costs, aside from your transportation and your staff salaries and your rent, you also have to pay LifeWise fees to be into this program. There's all these launch fees that we'll break down here a little bit. The first step, $500, is to show the commitment from the community, right? They just want to get $500 right away just to see that people are going to donate. And then later on in the kickoff process, they're asking for another 1,000 and another 1,500 towards the end to go live. All of this just goes up for startup costs and for the support assistance, and they get a little bit of merchandise out of it. They get a sign, and they get to go to the annual LifeWise Summit, so that's cool. They give that back to them. The student fees used to be $20 per year. That has since went up to 30. I guess even the gospel isn't safe from inflation, so. The other thing that really sticks out to me about the student fees is that they have a minimum. They're charging a minimum of $1,000 a year, 50 students by the old math, whatever, 33 students by the new math. Um, but if you don't have that number of students, if you don't have 33 students, if you only have 10 students, you're still paying $1,000 to LifeWise like you do have 33 students. So they're really taking it off the top there. This question comes up a lot. This is again from LifeWise internal documents here. They like to say that all of the money stays local because they get asked how much of it stays local. They say more than 100% of it stays local because everything is paid to accomplish the local work. Um, they say it's over 100% because the services provided are well below the market rate for comparable services. I mean, they're really tooting their own horn here about how much they're helping. Um, they're looking at about 9% of donations by their own estimation between student fees, and they take a 4% donation fee for every donation, every transaction, every little thing. Every time money is transferred between a donor and the local LifeWise program or the local LifeWise program into the fund, they take a 4% fee for all of this transaction fees, processing fees, that type of thing. There's just a couple other notes that I want to touch on before we move on from the boring budget stuff here. Um, the local programs do not have control of their own money. They get an expense card. All of the money that they're bringing in is held at the LifeWise corporate level, and they get an expense card that they then have to track. They get an allotment of what their money is. So they don't even have access to their entire fund. They get an allotment of it. Now, wonder why that is? It's because they are investing it. They are taking whatever they're not allotting to the local program that the local program has earned themselves. They are taking that money and investing it themselves, right? But they do give the local program a small percentage. They give them 50% of the current interest rate if they're under $50,000, or I'm sorry, if they're over $50,000, they get 50% of the current interest rate. We're talking the current interest rate is like 3%, 4% usually, somewhere in there. So they're getting half of that. Or if they have over $100,000, they'll get 75% of that. We're talking chump change here. I did the math. It was like $600 on $100,000 or something. They do have a long-term investment program where you can take your excess of money and invest it with the National Christian Foundation, which Molly talked about earlier.
DAF.
Mhm. So that's the whole thing there. That's a deep rabbit hole. I don't want to go too far into it. Um, so that's all if you're doing good. What if you're not doing good though? What if your budget is not working out? What if you're not being able to pull the donations in? It's important to know that they will close a program that isn't financially performing to the spot that they want it to be. If your program is not in the green, they will close it down. They will give you a chance and try to help you work through it with a written improvement plan. One of the things on the written improvement plan that they recommend is, of course, cutting salaries. Um, there have been issues over it. We've got different emails from people talking about how they are so focused on the money that they can't get past the mission. There is a person who is filing a complaint because she was asked to fudge her time cards. There have been people just up and quit because of this, and they've fired people because of this, right? So it really is the most important thing to them when is that your program is in the green. The one of the things that they recommend is that it's not even a recommendation, it's a directive. The director of the program will get their normal salary of $20 to $25 an hour cut down to minimum wage until they are back in the green. So we talked about some of the strategies earlier. This is kind of into the church fundraising strategy here.
So what we're looking at when they're talking about LifeWise Home Team, this is normally associated with part of their fundraising that is directed at churches. And that's where they will ask families to basically give a monthly amount and for that monthly amount to stay the same. All right. And so they're giving you obviously bronze partnership, silver partnership, gold partnership, platinum partnership. I'm not sure if there's any kind of reward or incentive to that other than pride in how much money you're giving the program. But again, that's mostly centered for churches. And then in the middle here, what we're seeing is this is an advertisement for Vacation Bible School for VBS, which happens during the summer. And VBS is actually saying, encourage your child to bring any money they'd like to contribute. This year, all offerings will go towards sponsoring students attending LifeWise Academy. So even during the summertime in these community, church-led, smaller, these VBS is something that's been around for a while, but it's not, as nefarious as LifeWise, but clearly they are working together, right, by filling these two gaps. And I would consider them a church. So again, this is how they're sort of propping each other up. Then you have over here an example of sort of, two or three different congregations getting together for a literal revival. If you notice down the bottom, they're actually having it at the elementary school there in Virginia. And I don't know if you guys know anything about revivals, but if it is a traditional sort of revival, it can get sort of, wild, and it can be very traditional fundamentalist in nature. Again, offerings will support LifeWise Academy. So you see where this is a multi-day event, right? And it's every night at 7. So you got to assume that, maybe in a place like this that's rural, that this is going to be a big draw and this could bring in a lot of money potentially.
Yeah, you have to understand that churches really are the first focus when we're looking at these local programs and their leadership boards and trying to get that 3-year budget. Like when they're trying to, pitch this program to the community, the churches are their first target. So it is their biggest target. And they're so connected and it just spreads.
Mhm. Absolutely. So here what we're seeing is an interview, or I should say an article in Business People here, where they're talking about Bible business and how LifeWise Academy, it's this model to share the gospel with public school kids. And they actually talk here about Tim Stoller, the gentleman in the first quote, isn't he the chairman of the board of directors?
He's on the board. Not
He's
sure
on
if
the
he's the
board.
chair.
I'm pretty sure he's the chair. He might not be, but he's definitely on the board. And he's actually talking about how this is an opportunity for owners to make a difference in their community. That, him as a business owner, as his business grows, he's always looking for people who have a strong character. And basically says that he thinks the business owners, I mean, this is a literal quote, I think owners stand to benefit from this by putting money into it. So, he actually says that ultimately it's the gospel that transforms our character, and that in turn tends to produce somebody in the workforce who will be a very valuable employee, which insinuates that you would need to be transformed by the gospel in order to be a valuable employee, which is wild. And then you also see Joel Penton talking about the paid for LifeWise study that is we've completely debunked, and we know wasn't based on accurate scientific information. So he's saying that business leaders are excited to partner with the program to financially invest because they see it as an important and practical way to reach students. So that is literally him saying that business leaders are seeing it as a way to reach children in order to take money from the children, like to earn an income from them as an audience, right? Whether it's from their parents or their piggy bank or whatever. But he's saying that, we are luring these children in, and business leaders are excited about that because that's more audience, that's more children for them to reach as well. So especially if it's a child-centered organization, think about maybe your local skating rink. They would be they would love to have an audience, right? A further audience of children, and to do it through LifeWise. We see things like that happen constantly. And then again, Stoller talks about, I would plead with every Christian business owner to get involved with this. It's probably the greatest opportunity we'll have in our lifetime to deploy the gospel. So this is a really evangelical centric way of looking at spreading the faith and proselytizing and sort of how that fits into their business model. These are some examples of their fundraising abilities, local businesses, that sort of thing. The one on the left here is talking about a 5K, and the top donors of here are Superior Credit Union, Superior Title Company, an anonymous donor. These are like from a community, $34,000 out of $55,000 that they're asking for. Over on the other side is a list of businesses who donated to this community's LifeWise 5K, which is their local McDonald's. Tom Ale Family of Dealerships is a huge, like, multi, building or multi-business organization of dealerships. They are big in Elida. You see, we're not going to read them all, but you see tons of other places that would be familiar, even corporate, Panera, things like that. So Raising Cane's is on there. And again, these companies, we've been told and we understand that they will basically do a fundraiser for anyone that comes asking. But for me, it is your responsibility as a corporate entity to know what exactly you are making um, money for and what you are pushing, right? Like that's your responsibility. So there should be some sort of restrictions, policies in regards to a company being willing to do this sort of thing to put their name on it. That's my personal opinion, but we see it time after time with places like Panera, like Raising Cane's, um, like
Science Central. Science Central is the most prime example here. Why is a science museum funding creationism? Like,
right
it just doesn't make sense.
at the bottom there, University of Toledo Athletics Department.
Well, we know why they're funding.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's just little it's examples like this. This is a newer one. This is as of like 6 days ago. Apparently, LifeWise Academy is going to have a summer camp up in Newton, and they are advertising it an entry fee of $100 per person. I'm not sure if that's per day or what the situation is. I didn't get a chance to look into it fully, but again, that financially is going to support their program, the LifeWise program for the next year. So that, it's just another way for them to fundraise. On the other side here, this is a really popular, lucrative hometown realty group, Keller Williams, and they are sponsoring a golf scramble with all proceeds going to LifeWise. And again, we see this nearly constantly. Every day there's, multiple more that we could stack up and use as examples.
Yeah, and these ones here are kind of the annual fundraisers. One of the four different strategies that they put forward in their trust raising manual. These summer camps, these 5Ks, these golf scrambles, they all fall under this big annual fundraiser that they do. So, it's not that they're just coming up with this themselves. Again, they have templates, they have scripts, they are told what to do, where to go, and how to get this money.
Again, here's two more examples. This is Culver's. This is a restaurant. It's a chain restaurant. Again, but they're saying that the specific Culver's during, this day will donate a percentage of their net sales to LifeWise Academy in that community. So that's just another example. And it spans from restaurants to, sporting complexes to anything you can imagine, right? We've seen they will have fundraisers like this for. The other one I think is interesting because it happens in a lot of places and it's not one that you would think of. But as a farmer, you can give a gift of grain and it helps support them. So it basically lets them donate without being personally taxed on the income that they would be getting from the grain if they sold it. So it's almost like talking about the assets, right? Like the assets before, if they're ready to be sold and you sell them, then you're going to have to pay that tax. Well, if you donate it, then you get out of that. It's the same concept here, but with grain. And so if you're donating the grain itself, then you're not having to pay that tax on it. That's another way. You see, not everyone would know this, but in places, rural places, these farmers, they have a lot of money. This could add up to a large chunk of money. And so it's definitely something to be aware of as well.
Keep in mind when they are proposing that these businesses come and do fundraisers with them or proposing, donations, they're telling them that 100% of the money stays locally, even though by their own admission, at least 9% of it is not. So just keep that in mind because all of these organizations that they're going to and all these businesses that they're going to are being told, one thing while another thing is happening.
Yeah. And I mean, here's the other thing to keep in mind too is that this ranges in places from rural communities who have an outrageous poverty level to, metro areas that also have an outrageous poverty level to everybody in between. And so they are absolutely preying on every single community from the most rich to the most impoverished. Over here, you can see where there's a bank that donated $1,000. There's a group that's called Lights for LifeWise, and they're planning a local Christmas tree festival. So that's like another sort of way that they would raise money in regards to supporting the program for the next year. Over here, you see an example of not money necessarily, but buses in this case, and we see this a lot. Their buses are donated. These came from the Wells County Council on Aging, with one bus being purchased and one being donated. So, you know,
Buy one, get one deal.
yeah, buy one, get one deal. We see this happen a lot. In fact, there was another location that they fundraised for a bus that had handicapped accessibility, and they fundraised for it. Like, we need this handicap bus to transport handicapped children in our community, and they got that money. They got the bus, and it was like within months they had ripped the handicapped accessibility parts out and added regular seats in. And I thought, you know, we understand, but it's still like there was no mention of the fact that, like, why were you fundraising specifically for this handicap vehicle? Because the way that it rang was very much preying on the empathy of someone that wants to raise money for people that are disabled. That's how it seemed, and how it came off. And so we see these sort of things happen a lot, and they will flip on a dime as to whatever it is that they need.
And another thing that we see frequently, not just the buses being donated, after that, we see the wrap, like the work on painting the bus, the work on putting the decals on, the maintenance work. They go and try to get that labor donated as well. So they really are just kind of taking it from all angles as much as they can. Um, so when we talk about property, they had this huge asset tripling. I'm not sure. That's certainly not physical assets. Their new headquarters was $3 million worth of that, somewhere around there. But I'm kind of thinking that most of their assets are financial assets, not tangible assets like property. After I was thinking about this a little bit deeper today, putting it together, because when your local LifeWise program actually wants their own property, LifeWise requires them to start their own 501(c)(3) independently. They will not let you use the name LifeWise in it either. They want you to name it X Character Academy or X Character Education or X Bible Academy, whatever your town name is, with some other variation of these terms, but they will not let you use the word LifeWise. But this is a requirement if you want to have property, if you want to build your own building. And of course, LifeWise will help you do that and give you all of the tools and templates you need to do that, just like they do with everything else. They work with a group called Ministry Consulting Group. And this organization specializes in just setting this up specifically for ministries, obviously. But they give you and do everything you need. It's pretty much just to sign on the dotted line and give us the money, and you are ready to go.
So put this together with when we talked about how, you know, a community or a city would donate the land. So the land's donated, there is no purchasing of property, and then they are also forming a 501(c)(3. And it really starts to stack up. And we'll talk about later just how much it does stack up and give you an example.
Later, as in right now.
Yeah.
Paulding, Ohio is where I grew up in. It is one of the poorest counties in Ohio. You're looking at a median income of 35,000 a year. But if you look at the local LifeWise organization, their total assets are over $1 million. Their total revenue is 10 times what the median income is of this county. So this is kind of what it looks like when this big money comes in to your local community, but then sucks the money back out of it. That's exactly what we're looking at here. So
This is taken from LifeWise Academy's 2023 impact report. And you can see where they've got three different plans to reach the nation: 13,000 districts, 90,000 schools, 50 million students. And they've got it broken down based on how much money they can raise. 30 million is going to do the essentials. They're looking at being in 3% of schools nationwide by 2030, so in the next 5 years. And then over 90% within 175 years. Okay, so that's the bare bones, right? That's with $30 million. Accelerated, they are looking at 5% of schools by 2030, over 90% within 85 years, but they would need 50 million to do that. At maximum projected impact, they would have 10% of our schools nationwide by 2030 and over 90% within 35 years. And so that would require $100 million in investments. And they break down exactly, you know, which parts that they would be increasing their investments in for which one. But you see the one that they have outlined there because that is their ultimate goal.
government relations. So that's kind of their lofty goals that they have there. Thank you. I see in the comment or in the chat, all funds go to corporate and some come back to support the summer camp. There's really nothing that comes back down. There's one example where LifeWise will do a match grant. If at that final launch fee of $1,500 that you get right before you go launch, they will match that $1,500. So that is the only instance that we have on paper of money actually coming back down. But yeah, all these fundraisers, they are done at the local level for the most part.
Mm. And I think it's important to mention just really quickly before we wrap up that, you would think because they're very much about improving the community and going into these communities and getting the children and the families to attend these churches, you would think that there would be some sort of opportunity to actually serve that community, right? Whether it would be through a food bank or a clothing drive or some sort of something that would actually benefit the community. We have yet to see something like that. It may exist. I can't say for sure, but the examples we showed you regarding food and entertainment and golf scrambles and all of these different things, that is what we see. We do not see them actually helping or taking the time or donating money to the needs of those in a community. Never. That is not something that we see. And so I think that's important to keep in mind too. Thanks so much for joining us. If you have any questions, we'll be here a few more minutes, or you can always reach out to us at contact@seculareducationassociation.org.
Yep, and we do have some QR codes there if you want to look at some of the financial documents and some of the internal documents and some of the citations that we have. That list of grants that I was talking about earlier, you can scan that QR code and go from there to find some of those. So,
Absolutely. So just want to remind everyone that week 4 is going to be June 24th and June 26th, and we are going to be talking about the agenda. And so that is going to sort of be the overarching, what is the point of all this? And we're going to give you our opinion along with the research that we found and some other documentation to kind of sort of paint a picture for you about what we believe that the agenda is here for LifeWise Academy and for release time religious instruction, at least in an evangelical sense as a whole.
and some broader strokes too. So.
We hope we'll see you.